Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
At the Home Depot, the holidays have arrived.
And so is all my family. So I'm working on keeping up with the laundry.
The Home Depot is here to help with Black Friday savings up to 40% off select appliances. Spend less time doing laundry with smart, efficient appliances from Samsung, ranked #1 in customer satisfaction.
Perfect. Less laundry time means more family time.
Get Black Friday savings now with free delivery and financing on select appliances at the Home Depot. Visit jdpower.com/awards for more details. Offer valid November 6th through December 4th. U.S. only. See store or online for details.
For Londoners, there are no longer such things as good nights. There are only bad nights, worse nights, and better nights. Hardly anyone at all has slept at all in the past week. The sirens go off at approximately the same time every evening, and in the poorer districts, queues of people carrying blankets, thermos flasks, and babies begin to form quite early outside the air raid shelters. The blitzkrieg continues to be directed against such military objectives as the tired shop girl, the red-eyed clerk, and the thousands of dazed and weary families patiently trundling their few belongings in perambulators away from the wreckage of their homes. After a few of these nights, sleep of a kind comes from complete exhaustion. That is actually, I did that in a male manly voice, but actually that's an American journalist called Molly Panter Downs, who's writing for the New Yorker and writes a series of has a column for the New Yorker magazine, and writes dispatches, and they're fabulous. They've been collected into a book form, and they're absolutely brilliant.
Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Murray and James Holland, for part 3 of our Blitz series. This is living through the Blitz. We've talked about air raids, we've talked about Exec, we've talked about Wotan, we've talked about Reg Jones, RV Jones, we've talked about Such as It Is trying to achieve, but actually living through it is what it's like for people to endure.
And the sudden adjustment to something that no one has ever experienced before. Yes, I know there was Zeppelin raids and First World War and all the rest of it, but and high level, Gotter planes coming over and all the rest of it. But it's not the same. This is the first sustained bombing on this kind of scale that anyone has ever experienced anywhere in the world. It is a
completely
brand new experience.
Uncharted territory, isn't it? Completely.
Yes, there is Guernica. Yes, there's Warsaw and Rotterdam and all the rest of it. But those are kind of one-offs. Yeah. This is sustained. It is absolutely clear that the authorities are not ready for this.
In the previous 2 episodes, London's the capital of the world's largest empire. It's synonymous with power and so on. And here it is, London's vulnerable, and the shockwaves around the rest of the world. If you're an anti-imperial subject to the British Empire, you're probably thinking, "Gosh, this thing is vulnerable. That it's teetering on the brink," and it's a completely new kind of war that's done that. That's changing the whole realm of possibility in the world, political possibility in the world. Right?
Yeah, it's like the dragons flying over King's Landing.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
that's what it's like.
Yes,
suddenly you've got this great city and it's all crumbling to pieces. And also it's not a traditional war with armies and navies, but it's a people's war.
Yeah.
It is like a city being besieged as it was in the old days, ransacked.
Yeah.
And there are now huge gaping wounds in Britain's cities. I mean, much of Holborn and Fleet Street are completely gone, for example, in London. Most of the London docks have gone. Warehouse burned, entire streets levelled. If you're standing on St. Paul's, you can, in St. Paul's Churchyard, you can see across a huge swathe of London, the London city, rubble. Where once there was, just a few weeks before there were buildings and historic buildings and streets and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And the bomb damage maps that accompany this really, really, really shocking to look at, aren't they? They're completely...
They really, really are. And we should make sure we definitely post some of those up on the Patreon, but also
and there's
social media and stuff.
There is a bomb survey website as well where you can look exactly. And according to that, there was one exactly here on our house. But maybe that explains why it's an old house, so maybe that's why it's a bit wonky. But I don't know where that one actually landed. It's quite interesting. Smack on where I'm meant to be. There's where I am now. There's meant to have been a bomb. It's nothing like the death toll that pre-war planners are expecting. So in lots of ways, it's peculiar, isn't it? Because there's been a lot of thought and a lot of discussion, a lot of debate before the war about what bombing will be, what its effect will be, what it's for. You know, the soothsayers of the new aerial war didn't get right was the casualty figures, which are much lower than expected.
Yeah, it's interesting because the bomber is getting through just as predicted, and it is causing immense destruction. But it's in terms of buildings and livelihoods rather than lives themselves.
Yeah. Why is it working out like that?
Because most people are being able to crouch in cellars and Anderson shelters, and Anderson shelters are extraordinarily effective unless you get a direct hit. I mean, it won't surprise you to know that I've got one. You know, if you do what they say. So what you do with Anderson shelters come in. They come in bits of very, very thick corrugated metal. Yeah. So you know your normal wrinkly iron piece of sheet. It's quite thin, isn't it? It's heavy, but it's quite thin. Yeah. These things are really thick. Right. That, each piece in an Anderson shelter weighs an absolute ton. Right. And what you have to do is you have to dig out a massive hole in the garden. Mm. Most of it you bury. Right. So you bury it into, so you put the sides down into, so you pick out this rectangle, this deep rectangle in your garden, the bottom of your garden. You put the sides in, then you put the curvy roof bit over the back ends, all the rest of it. Dig your little entrance area into it. Then the soil that you've taken out, you put on top. Yeah. So you can turn your roof of your Anderson shelter into a veg patch or whatever. You can jump up and down on it, and it is absolutely solid as rock. The only thing that's going to destroy it is a direct bomb hitting you. So and that's incredibly unlikely. So as long as you're in an Anderson shelter, chances are you're going to be absolutely fine. But also there are lots of underground shelters, and there are people are going into the underground stations, which are incidentally no guarantee for safety. But
no, as we've outlined, if the water main, like in Balham, if the water main struck, then you're done for, aren't you?
And they're not the only ones. Later on in the war, Bank Station gets hit, Liverpool Street gets hit. Yeah. But clearly, where to go in an air raid dominates everyone's thoughts. Those are cellars and basements. They make them reasonably comfortable, and you can reinforce them as well. The Anderson shelters are really, they are a genius design. They're free to anyone who hasn't got
this is
a salary of less than 250 quid.
And if you're richer, you have to pay for them. Better off, you have to pay for them.
Someone called it the contradiction of democracy at war.
Yeah. And there's the other one's the Morrison, isn't it? Where you under the table, isn't it?
Which less effective. It's like a sort of iron dog cage.
Yeah, under a table. The idea is that if the house falls down, you're at least saved by that. I mean, it's very interesting, though, when they're surveying people about this, that the soundproofing is the number one priority, then sociability, then bomb-proof comes third, which I think... Which is a sort of...
Well, I think it's just everyone getting sleep. I mean, everyone knows what it's like when you haven't had enough sleep. You're just absolutely wretched, aren't you? You just think, anything for a kip. And I think, the problem is that people find is they just can't sleep when there's lots of bombs going on and whistling down. So problem with Anderson shelters, though, is because they're below ground, and particularly as you're getting into the winter, it's getting damper and damper. You cannot leave, and I know this from practical experience, you cannot leave bedding in there. Literally within 2 days, it'll go mouldy. It just does. Little mould spores appear absolutely everywhere. It's really grim.
Again, one second. How did you come about by an Anderson shelter? How come?
I literally just bought one on eBay. It's really good. It's got the little crown on it, stamped on it, and the war arrow, War Department arrow and stuff. It's probably it was a real project. I mean, we got it over at the History Festival. I did have it in. I was going to put it in the garden. I thought it'd be quite funny. But when the kids were a bit younger, I mean, so the one at the History Festival, we built bunks in it and stuff and put bedding in, and it's absolutely wretched.
Really, is it horrible?
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. But you can't. I mean, you could sleep in it, but it's really grim. It's dank and musty and horrible, and you so much rather be in a tent
It's right. It's not a charming hobbit hole then of any.
No, there's no charm about it at all. It's just dank and musty and below ground. It's really horrible.
But it is interesting though because yes, as you say,
but safe, and you could sleep. And as long as and to be honest, as long as you do take your bedding out every night, you're all right.
You're all right. Yeah. But it's interesting though because as you say, it's about getting sleep because there's a kind of acceptance that you're playing the odds, aren't you? So bomb-proof comes third. You're gambling on trying to get a night's sleep rather than necessarily being particularly safe. There's an acceptance if the shelters hit, you're gone.
There's also something peculiarly British about the recommendation for light in an Anderson shelter is putting a candle with a upturned flower pot on top. So zero light, but the assumption that if you've got a garden, you're going to have a flower pot.
A flower pot, yeah. The thing is, though, not everyone's going to shelters, are they? Surveys in November show only 27% of people are bothering with their domestic shelters.
Yeah,
which is interesting. Or there's public shelters. So, I mean, the idea that you go to a town hall or a railway station.
Well, this is the thing, because you think a shelter is going to be a kind of sort of great big cavernous
like
of concrete bunker, like the ones that the Germans are building, like the Nazi hospital on Guernsey.
Yeah,
not a bit of it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's railway stations, it's town halls, village halls, and a lot of them aren't subterranean at all. They're offering no protection.
That's very weird, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I've been genuinely shocked by this. I just thought they would... so the idea is that the public shelter is something that, where you're going to be safe and secure. It seems to me like all you're doing is just putting a lot of people in a room and hoping that the bombs don't hit it.
One place together. Yeah, well, that's how, and that's how you end up with these mass casualty events at schools and things, isn't it? It's that basically
exactly that.
People just
there's also reinforced trenches in parks that have been built. There's also brick-built public surface shelters. So, you get a green park, there's a kind of big brick, it basically looks like a sort of, public convenience. And quite a lot of public buildings and private commercial buildings have turned themselves over to public shelters. So, for example, Dickon and Jones, isn't that in Bond Street, I think, isn't it?
Something I think so, yeah.
They turn its basement into a public shelter. Surface shelters soon become known as Morrison sandwiches because you're basically sandwiched between the bomb and the earth.
The public know that these are no good. So there's a mass observation report that's a man saying they're no damn use at all. A breath of wind would knock them over.
We should just say, for those of you who don't know what mass observation is, so mass observation is set up in the 1930s by a bunch of sort of young, bright, I think Cambridge types. Including Humphrey Jennings, the filmmaker. Yeah. And their idea is to sort of go around and asking people, they do surveys, they do street surveys of people with clipboards on out in streets going, can you give me your view on X, Y, and Z? But they also ask people to write diaries. The whole mass observation collection is now kept at, is it Sussex University? They're absolutely fascinating. And obviously they were started in the 1930s at this sort of time of great change, and then, fell into their laps that the war began. So this just, we have a very, very, very clear picture of what British public opinion was during the Second World War. It's just amazing.
Yes, it's a remarkable thing, mass observation. They're all sort of social democrat left wing people, aren't they, asking the questions? So it does have that kind of. But nevertheless, it's the most extraordinary thing because this is, after all, the era of the beginning of opinion polling and all that, Gallup and all that, just getting going, isn't it? And mass observation offers this really, really interesting snapshot, doesn't it?
Well, yes, and I've got this collection book called War Begins at Home, and it's all their surveys. People in the ARP. What do you think about them, and all this kind of stuff. It's just absolutely amazing, and different views, and who joined and why. Of all volunteers who were ARPs, for example, 13% were upper class, 23% were middle class, 54% were artisan class, 10% were unskilled working class. So it's just full of kind of sort of comparatively pointless kind of information like that, but it's all absolutely fascinating. Yeah. It does create a picture, it has to be said.
But one of the things that's striking about this, though, is people would rather be together when the raids are happening. That's the thing. Soundproofing and then sociability is the next thing. So what people want is communal shelters. They want to be together. And And so there are communal domestic shelters for people who haven't got a personal one, and these are all pretty awful as well, aren't they?
Well, the thing is when they're designed, they assume they're going to be for, they assume a raid will come over, it'll take half an hour, and then you troop back home again.
Pop back in, and pop home.
Pop so back to no work. One's expecting them to be there, but people end up there all night and then for days on end.
Yeah,
That's the problem. And so they're just not being designed for that. So they've got poor lighting, poor ventilation, very few home comforts, usually sort of covered in lino, and a few benches and stuff. So if you're staying there all night, you tend to sort of spend all night on a bench or sitting on the floor, or, it's just, they're just completely inadequate. And the most notorious shelter is in Stepney. This is the Tilbury shelter, which is a 300-foot long warehouse full of margarine on Commercial Road. And it is an active warehouse by day and a communal shelter by night. And so they can't just keep clearing it out every single day. But it soon becomes home to as many 16,000 people. It's just absolutely crammed, and there's nowhere near enough space. And again, another mass observation report goes over. Everything is sprawled, a vast mass of human beings and their bedding. The dirt and stench is indescribable. The place is used by horses in the daytime, and is apparently nobody's job to clear away the horse dung before nightfall. The bedding is just spread over it. To the odour of the horses is added that of thousands of unwashed humans. The place was crowded with all creeds, colours, and races of people. I think this is really, really interesting because, it's again, because the docks are this place of movement of goods, they're also a place of movement of people. And this idea that we had ethnic minorities only arrived, with Windrush in the 1950s is just nonsense. I mean, there are huge numbers of Asians, Afro-Caribbeans,
Chinese,
and Jews, particularly in the East End. So there's from East European countries and stuff. So it is absolutely a melting pot there. A lot of church crypts are used. And again, that is usually down to individual vicars in the Church of England kind of opening them up. There's also a whole load of caves at Chislehurst, for example, which is sort of southeast Kent, isn't it?
It's cost that's driving part of this, isn't it, though? The Anderson shelters for 6 people is £7.10 shillings.
Don't forget this is the 30s where people are still broke. It's the end of it's the 40s it's from the end of the 30s.
Off the back of that, Deep shelter is £12, £15 per head. So you're better off with cost effectiveness.
Well, an Anderson shelter is a little over £1 a head.
The way London's laid out, not everyone's got a place for one, have they? Not everyone's got a garden.
Well, the problem is a lot of these tenement rows that you have in the East End, in Stepney and Bethnal Green and all these sort of places, and Rotherhithe, they have yards at the back, but they don't have gardens. So they're bricked over, concreted over. People get their gardens in allotments. Now, those who have allotments can put their Anderson shelter in their allotment. That's fine. But if you haven't got those, you're a bit stuffed. I can't stress enough, to create an Anderson shelter is not, it is not for the faint-hearted. You need a number of big, strong men to be able to kind of
to dig out the space.
To put it. Well, you've got to screw them all. You've got to screw all the pieces together. You've got to dig out a bloody great hole.
But it's the underground, though. I think if anything, apart from the Anderson shelter, it's the underground that is sort of fixed in people's imaginations as where people hid from the bombs in the Second World War, isn't it? The problem is that they've been used in the First World War, but the government's very, very unsure about use of the underground, isn't it? It doesn't want people using it as shelters. So in 1924,
no, they absolutely don't at all, and they wanted to everyone know that this is a concession, not a change of heart.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's not a rule. You still can't use underground, so you can temporarily use them as a concession because of the Blitz.
And they don't want them used as shelters because they're worried that people will just basically never come back, aren't they?
Yeah, just turn into a sort of troglodyte existence where no one ever emerges.
Subterranean people who will vanish, never to be seen again.
I think that's quite an odd attitude, and I think that's quite unlikely.
It's really strange and governing. I have no idea what people are like in that instance. And the government do give in. There's the incident at Liverpool Street Station on Black Saturday where EastEnders They storm the turnstiles, don't they? And they
do, and the authority, the officials, the underground officials are calling on troops to kind of hold them off, and the overwhelming mass of people just jumps the turnstiles, and obviously the troops aren't going to open fire on them or anything. There's a raid going on, for God damn it, and so they go down, and there is the 1924 rule which had been brought in by the then Home Secretary Sir John Anderson, which has ruled out the use of underground stations other than just commuters. The policy is maintained, but there are, as I say, it is a concession that is made. But, it's a great victory for the working class.
Herbert Morrison is he's a big London politician, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Former Hackney,
he knows
head of Hackney.
He knows better. He knows London better than perhaps the government do. So it's only 4% of people use the underground, which is interesting because that is...
Yeah, and there's also, the big problem is that the other big reason why they don't want to use it, and I think there is a case for this, is that it's for commuting. They want life to go on. They want people to continue to work and for the day-to-day existence to function as normally as it possibly can. Yeah. And that means you need the trains to work, and they're not going to if you've got... people on the station. So they clear them out every single day. People are not allowed to stay down there during the day. You have to clear them out, and you're not allowed in until kind of, 4:30, or so you can start queuing at 4 and you can't. You can get in at 7 or something, or no, you can get in at 4, but the commuters still have you can only take up a certain amount of the platform until 7:30. Yeah, and then they switch the electricity off, so no one gets electrocuted. But you can see why it is actually a bit of a headache having all these people using it. But there are bits of the line which aren't used. So that have been dug in the Victorian era under Borough High Street, for example. That's converted into a shelter for 8,000. During the First World War, the London Electrical Railway Company, which is what it was that used to run the underground, had 80 of its stations over which were used as air raid shelters. So there is a bit of a precedent.
But it's all improvised provision, though, isn't it? Because there's been nothing properly put in place.
But it's interesting though, because it is one of the enduring images, isn't it, of the Blitz? There's people crowding on the underground, but actually it's only ever about 4% of the population using it.
And obviously, with more people using shelters every night, the government has to set up a committee to address this under Lord Horder, who's the King's Doctor, to examine shelter conditions. And they go to the East End, they discover gross overcrowding. Yeah.
And no shit, Sherlock. That's what they discover.
Yeah,
gross overcrowding.
Lack of sanitation, no toilets. And so exactly. So the recommendation is regular cleaning, inspection, better toilets, basically. First aid posts, shelter marshals. And it's very interesting, isn't it? That I know you said earlier that it's the idea that the raid will happen, you'll be in there half an hour and you'll come out again. It's very interesting how you've had a decade of bomber panic.
And no one's thought of this.
And no one's thought of any of this.
No, it's
a
absolutely
decade
amazing.
of bomber.
If you're convinced that the bomber's going to get through, why haven't, and you're thinking, everyone's going to die. Well, why don't you think, actually, if the bomb does get through, how can we do to make sure that people don't die? Well, I'll tell you what, here's an idea. Let's build some deep shelters.
It's very strange, sort of fatal.
You could have been doing it all through the 1930s.
Yeah, very strange fatalism, isn't it? They do make improvements, so councils are allowed to install electrical lighting and all this sort of stuff, but even in April 1941, many people are having to stand or sit on the floor all night. There are bunks in the tube stations, 76 of the tube stations, and toilets, Elsan chemical toilets installed in most London shelters, but these are obviously easily knocked over. So, it all feels a bit sticking plaster, doesn't it?
Very sticking plaster. Churchill's obviously very worried about this as well, because, if there's one man who understands the importance of keeping morale up with his wonderful speeches from 1940 and all the rest of it, it's him. Remembers there's a short and superfluous line at Aldwych, which is a breakaway line from the Piccadilly line. And he says, why don't we just not use that line anymore and adapt that as a shelter? And they go, actually, that's not a bad idea. So again, a bit like the tunnel under Borough High Street. Whitewash the walls, improve the lighting, track boarded over, 203 pier bunks installed, plus improved toilets, ticket system for reserving bunks. Westminster Library donates 200 books. So this is part of your Blitz spirit, isn't it? Educational lectures arranged, and even ENSA giving a series of concerts through the winter down below. Canteens with WVS, which is a women's voluntary service, serving hot food.
This sounds very much like sort of a model shelter, possibly to cheer everyone up or give the impression everything's under control, isn't there,
going on? Shelters are policed, so this is the point. So they can't go underground before 4 o'clock. And part of the platform has to be clear till 7:30. Well, then of course inevitably the black market arises, and selling pitches for as much as 2 shillings and 6pence, which is the average weekly wage, is around £3. So that's quite a big dent,
quite a bite.
Ticketing is then brought in to counteract this, but then people start queuing even earlier to get their tickets and to get their slots. So you don't have people in the underground before 4 o'clock, but you do have people queuing around the block from sort of 10 in the morning, and that's obviously not good because they need to be out working and blah blah blah. It's not great, is it?
It's not great, and it really, it's
sort of unimpressive.
It's very unimpressive, unserious, and this sort of like as you were saying, there's the bomber panic of the 1930s. The bomber will always get through. The sort of fatalism of that idea, and that's why there's no night fighters. That's why because the bomber will get through. There's nothing we can do about it. It's very, very weird. Very weird. Yeah. And the tube isn't necessarily safe. So, you've got people killed in plenty of tube stations, Tottenham Road Station, Trafalgar Square, Bounds Green, Camden Town and Balham. 54 people killed at Bank. Yeah, on average, you've got 120,000 people using tube stations nightly, even though they're dangerous. Because everywhere's dangerous, isn't it? It's a crapshoot, the whole thing, isn't it? That's the point. It's completely random. You are at least with other people. You can't hear the raids as much, and it's a feeling of security. So people are prepared to risk it. I mean, all these decisions. It's interesting. I'm starting to feel myself thrown into wondering, what would I do? What would I?
Well, quite. But the awful thing is it is once again it is the poorest who are suffering the most, because they're in the East End, so they're getting the brunt of the Blitz. They're the most likely to be homeless. They're also the most likely not to have a garden, which means they can't have an Anderson shelter, which means they've got to use this. So it's not good.
Right. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back for more not good in part 2. See you in a tick. Welcome back to Weird Ways That Make You Talk. Vere Hodgson in her diary of the 4th of January 1941 says, "We have been trying to trace the genesis of a remark made by Queen Victoria, which is much quoted now. There is no depression in this house. We are not interested in the possibilities of defeat. They do not arise."
Love it. Really funny.
Is that what you need to tell yourself, or is that how you feel? Who knows?
Definitely a bit of both. I'm sure. But the next thing we need to look at is ARP wardens. They're incredibly famous. There's such an image, the black helmet with the white, or the white helmet with the black W on, and the navy battle dress. And so when the sirens ring out, Wailing Willie or Wailing Winnie, as it became known, everyone else scurries for their shelters or their, whatever it might be, or their Morrison sandwich. And I'm going to go through these public parks now and sort of look at brick buildings in a completely different light. but obviously for the ARP wardens, the work is only beginning. So how are they organised? Well, this is just fascinating. So numbers vary, but the rule of thumb is 10 ARP posts per square mile. It's quite a lot, isn't it? Okay. So each post might be a shop, might be a hall, it might be a basement, it might be a little corner shop, something like that. And what you'd have there is this would be your kind of hub. This is your where you loiter until an incident happens. You've got a telephone there. You've got a typewriter. You've got basic things that store for whistles and electric torches and all this kind of stuff. And normally you'd have a post warden, and then you'd have a deputy post warden. And London boroughs are then divided, and indeed boroughs outside of London are divided into sectors with 3 to 6 wardens controlled by a senior warden in each sector. So you might also have subsectors too. So it just depends on the density of the population and density of the buildings there. But obviously sectors are much larger in rural areas than they are in towns, geographically, but not in terms of population. So an ARP officer is almost always local. And it is absolutely essential that they know their patch.
Yeah.
Interestingly, wardens, both male and female. So 1 in 6 is female.
That's interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? I think it. I think it really is.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. 9/10 of ARP wardens are part-timers who come on duty after the day's work.
Yeah.
And that is the same incidentally, with the auxiliary fire service. So my grandfather, he's in his hat shop in St. James's by day and then doing his fireman's bits by night. And you wouldn't do every single night. You do maybe like 3 nights a week, something like that. But quite often, when it's really, really hectic, you do more.
You come in, yeah.
But the big problem is that during the phony war, during the Boer War, there's a hemorrhage of civil defence workers. They'll just think, sod this and go back. And the government also puts a halt on recruitment. So with the onset of the Blitz, they're definitely caught a bit short. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
In June 1940, it's announced that men aged 30 to 50 liable for conscription to the armed forces can opt for the police or fire services instead. And also those who are already in post, already ARP wardens, they're frozen in post and also in their AFS, the auxiliary fire service. So you're not allowed to resign. You're not allowed to go and become a soldier in Royal West Kents or whatever it might be. And this is then extended to rescue and stretcher parties from July 1940. And in October, full-time ARP wardens also frozen in their jobs. You cannot go off and do something else.
You're not allowed. Oh,
so if you're a 32 ARP warden, you stay there.
Yeah.
That relaxes later on in the war, by the way.
No, I mean, that shows that it's a front like any other, isn't it? It's being treated as such.
Well, it bloody is.
Because it is.
And it is as dangerous as anything else, if not more so. I mean, I just remind people of that point that there are more casualties to the Blitz, civilian casualties in the Blitz than there are to the armed services till middle of 1943.
There's that moment in Sheffield, there's an air raid in Sheffield where the army will jump, the siren goes and the army will jump in their lorries and drive off. And these civilians going, "Are you running away from the Germans again, are you?" Because the army's reputation in 41, 42 is that they run off when the Germans turn up, and that the civilians have to stay and endure it. Yeah, and there's this idea that that's part of the problem as the war progresses, that the civilian population are having to deal with the war and the army aren't. That the army look like they're not fully stuck in, and the civilian population have no choice. Anyway, so Barbara Nixon is a voluntary part-time warden in Finsbury in May 1940, and then goes full-time, £2, 5 shillings a week.
Wow.
She's moved to post. Yeah. How much money is that in today's money? Who knows? She's moved to post 13. It's a very much mixed bunch of wardens in borough. An ex-burglar. We hope he's an ex-burglar. I mean, after all, air raids offer a fantastic opportunity for burglars, doesn't it? I mean, it's ideal if you're a burglar. Trade unionists, 2 men who hoped being an ARP would defer call-up. And they're quite right. Barbara's given a tin hat, respirator and a whistle in May 1941 that they get that uniform that we talked about. Training's rudimentary, but it's really about knowing your patch, knowing where people live, who they are, what they're like, where the hydrants are, where the danger points are, the cul-de-sacs, where Nana, who might need help, lives. Yep. Telephone numbers of shelters and rest centres and stuff. So I mean, it's a lot of duties, isn't it? And you really do need. It needs. I mean, it's like neighbourhood watch on steroids, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah. It'd be exhausting, but it would have been exhilarating, I think.
Yes, possibly. I think there's a fair slab of terror with it as well.
Yeah, of course,
because you're not down a tube station. The red alert would sound, which means raiders overhead. Wardens would go to shelters, ticking off names, and then go around looking for stragglers, basically laggards, and carry kids and help people to the shelters. Then if a bomb fell, a warden would have to go and assess. I mean, this is a dangerous life, isn't it? Go and find out what
it's amazing.
And then rush back to the post to ring through to the control centre to let them know what's happened at the scene of a bomb. A Kent ARP warden writes, "I go into a house, decide who's alive and who's dead, tot up the numbers of victims and what is necessary in the way of fire services, ambulances, demolitions, etc." Yeah,
there's a lot on their shoulders. It's a lot of personal responsibility. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that sort of really, really changed now is people are kind of reluctant to take on personal responsibility because of litigation and, all the rest of it. But not a bit of it then. People, you make a decision, no one's going to come back at you. Yeah. So if there is a major incident, then wardens do what they can until the civil defence services arrived. In theory, the police are in charge, but in practice, ARP wardens and police work alongside one another. Fire services then arrive and get to it, and then the heavy rescue squad, which is, that is a thing. Men try and lift masonry off the first cutting of supply of gas, water and electricity. So that's the first thing you got to do. You can't have any more of these drains going on, but obviously quite often drains burst, and so you can't do anything about it. But what you're trying to do is, it's a bit like your Sparky coming into your house. First thing they do is isolate all the electricity and switch off the water. And all too many people that get trapped end up being gassed or drowned or whatever, or electrocuted. I mean, it's just hideous. But anyway, but rescue party, they use, pneumatic jacks, blocks and tackles, and even oxyacetylene cutters. All that stuff is used as well. I mean, one of the big problems you have is that quite often you're operating at dark in the middle of the night, and you obviously get illumination from flames and stuff, but otherwise you've got to use shielded torches, and those ones with little filters on, little blue and orange filters on that kind of make them dimmer. And of course, there's a huge responsibility on the leader of the rescue team to decide whether it's worth digging down or not. You've got to make a judgment call, and on that, people are living and dying. It's just incredible. So then what about the casualties? Because obviously there are lots of casualties. There might not be as many as you think, but there are still lots of casualties. This bit actually is quite well organised. So you get a ticket, basically, whether you're dead or whether you're alive. And the ticket has various options on it. I've seen copies of these tickets, and there's lots of sort of a label : to fill in, and it might be kind of, have you had a tourniquet applied? Have you got a fractured leg? Where is the wound? Anything else? Respiratory problems, blah blah blah. So you have a ticket for crush industry, another one for unconscious casualty or dead body. An X means an internal injury. A T means a tourniquet applied. And sometimes they just write them on the forehead as well. Yeah.
First aid posts. Hospitals obviously are under a massive pressure, aren't they? Major casualties are picked up by ambulances, which might be an ambulance, but it's as likely to be a van or a taxi or a private car, whatever's been seconded. This is literally everything. I mean, there's a huge number of taxis that have been deployed for the fire services, for example. It's the same thing, whatever there is. Because don't forget, Britain is still a very automotive society in 1939, but nothing like it is now. They just don't have enough vehicles for the task that, proper ambulances for the job is hand, not at this stage of the war anyway. So it is kind of make do with whatever you can. The other thing I think is really interesting, they do have lots and lots and lots of first aid posts, and this is sort of basic stuff. So, non-critical casualties are taking the first aid posts and patched up, and, It is relying on people's civic duty and sense of responsibility, isn't it? Enormously, drawing really heavily on that in a way that means the fact there's been less provision is perhaps, we now live in a world where there's no provision, and as you said, people probably would they respond like this to this civic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get
we never find out.
I don't want to sort of turn into my brother, but Christian values and everything. I mean, we're much more kind of religious society then. People did go to church, and Christian values, love thy neighbor and all that kind of stuff, are absolutely imprinted on people. And while there are plenty of scallywags and kind of blackguards, there is a very, very pronounced sense of civic duty, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where, this quote you've got here from Frances Faviel, whose job is to, and identifying the dead, her job is at a mortuary.
Yeah, she's an artist, so she studied anatomy at the Slade, which is a very famous London art school.
Yeah, well, so there's her qualification for this job.
Yes,
in as much as you might have one. She says so her job is to try and figure out who's who. Yeah, the stench was the worst thing about it, that and having to realise that these frightful pieces of flesh had once been living, breathing people. If one was too lavish, making one body almost whole, then another one would have sad gaps. There were always odd members which did not seem to fit, and there were always too many legs. I think this task dispelled for me the idea that human life is valuable. It could be blown to pieces by blast, just as dust was blown by the wind.
I know, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the other problem is that plenty of dead are never picked up at all. Because they're under rubble, and there's only so much you can do.
Yeah,
so you pick at a collapsed building. You're more likely to pick at South Hallsville School because it's the start of it all. South Hallsville gets bombed on the 10th of September. So, 3 days into it. Yeah. But, a month on, everyone's become quite hardened to all this. And you go, no bothers, no one's going to be alive in that. And if they are, they won't be alive. They're not going to be much good to anyone. So we're just going to make a hard decision and leave it. Yeah. So consequently, there's no point in wasting your time where your time is in so much demand, picking through a collapsed building where the people are, when you do eventually find them, are going to be dead. So you just leave them there. But the consequence of that is, they then rot.
But it's homelessness is the issue, isn't it? Because as we've said, the casualties aren't the thing. So people are being, they're literally, to use a British euphemism, they're being dehoused, aren't they?
Tens of thousands of papier-mâché coffins, which are just unwanted and unneeded. But there are lots and lots of homeless. And Maya Allen is a journalist, and she writes, "It's harrowing, and I feel a furrow perpetually on my brow. There seems no light or laughter anymore, and one knows the test is still to come. But no one is depressed at heart. Those who are homeless are angry. People are just wandering around like unclaimed mongrels, too stunned to even ask where they can get food and a new home, and dragging their bits of bedding and children about with them."
Amazing.
But that scene is repeated all throughout Europe and Japan and dark corners of the globe between now and 1945 and the years that immediately follow. So this becomes a very, very familiar scene. I think there is this stunning, what do? Your house is destroyed. There is no household insurance for war damage. Nearly 3 weeks after Black Saturday, which is Saturday the 7th of September, the start of the Blitz, there's still 25,000 people in rest centres.
God.
Which are designed to house people just for a few hours. And
they're on soup and blankets, aren't they, basically? So that
Yeah. And they're provided by the Canadian Red Cross. The WVS is absolutely amazing. This is a women's voluntary service. They turn up in their kind of sort of bottle green wool uniforms and hats with their Christian cheer and rock cakes and cups of tea, all of which is great. I mean, the government is kicking into gear, but just not quick enough. Camp beds are ordered in tens of thousands, blankets, basics, and all the rest of it. And feeding centres are set up, but it's not enough.
But the numbers are boggling. 2.25 million people are made homeless between September 1940 and May 1941. I mean, that's absolutely an amazing number, isn't it?
What's two-thirds of 2.25 million? It's like 1.5 million?
Yeah.
1.5 million in London?
Yeah.
So that means that 1 in 6 in the London area suddenly without a home. 1 in 6!
Yeah. Extraordinary. How homeless is someone? How badly damaged is their house? How uninhabitable is it? Who's going to fix it? What if there's an unexploded bomb?
You're only supposed to use a rest centre if you're bombed out. Well, are you bombed out with a UXB?
I'd say so, but this is it, isn't it?
Yeah, and what do you do? Where do you get an emergency grant from? If you are literally lost everything, how do you fund that? What happens to war damage compensation?
And also your identity card may have been lost and destroyed, and your ration coupons. And how do you keep people honest about that? Yeah, I mean, it's all very, very hard.
And bottom line is, it's basically one big problem, which is how do you rehabilitate homeless citizens? And of course, the issue is it then involves lots and lots of overlapping efforts of half a dozen government departments, and people can get lost in that. But it's something that the government has to sort out very, very quickly, because 1.5 million people in London getting angry is not good.
No.
So they do.
And it's exactly the thing they're worried. They've been worried about, that the population will turn on them.
So why haven't they sorted out in the 1930s? It goes back to the whole thing. If everyone's going on, the bomber will always get through, then why aren't you better prepared?
There's paralysis in facing the issue, isn't it?
It's because no one wants to confront it. It's because 92% of the population in 1938 of the Munich crisis don't want war. It's all sounding very familiar to me.
The Ministry of Information are issuing a leaflet saying, this is where you could find your help. Staff are sent to rest centres, and Public Assistance Board officers issue hardship payments on the spot. So there's advice and all this sort of stuff. And you end up with one-stop shops set up from mid-October with the CAB and the Women's Citizens Advice Bureau and the Women's Voluntary Service. So that it becomes a project, but a thing that's being improvised on the fly.
Yeah. Mobile offices sent to bombed areas. So, van would turn up and they'll have all this, and they'll have the clipboards and everything, and they'll go, okay, here's 800 quid.
And then they're requisitioning empty houses, furniture for people. I mean, the scale of it.
And also the other thing is that between boroughs and local councils, they can look up, so.
Well, if you're bombed out in Hackney, are you allowed to go to Brent? Is the
right, exactly that. And the local authorities are thinking, well, I'm very sorry for the poor people in Hackney, but the same token,
we've got our own problems.
We've got our own problems, and at what point do we inherit? Why should we be paying for people from Hackney when we've got to be paying for people with Brent? So there is this sort of crossover, and actually the crossover isn't too bad, all things considered. But as I say, it's just people are overwhelmed by the scale of this problem and the answers. And I think actually, they do kick in quite quickly, and the one-stop shops and the people that sent in and the people that can issue cash instantly. Yeah, I think all of that is done reasonably well. It's just, why hadn't they thought about this beforehand? I think that's the key. The key thing, and I'm not talking about once the war begins. I'm talking before the war. So I would lay that very, very squarely at the Stanley Baldwin and Chamberlain governments for great that you've got the first fully coordinated air defence system, but this is poor. And again, just to reiterate, no home insurance for war damage. Instead, the 1940 War Damages Commission. I mean, God, that's enough to put the drive kind of anyone absolutely insane.
Their position, isn't it, is that when the raid is over booklet says government position is it'll all be paid for once the war's over.
Okay, that's helpful. So what do I do now?
Yeah, and only for actual damage, not consequential stuff such as loss of trade, etc. And
I love this line. It's a conversation based on quote unquote reasonably reinstating the property to its former condition in line with the building costs of March 1939. In other words, it's absolutely it's the ship has come in for every cowboy builder in town.
Yeah, owner or the council has to carry out repairs where possible. A tenant is not expected to continue paying rent, but then has to give up the lease. Would be expected to give up the lease. So. Yeah. The thing is how do you handle this well? How does
an immediate grants of £800 issued to pay off outstanding mortgages? But I don't know about you, Al, but the thing that strikes me about this is I'm feeling overwhelmed by this.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere you look, lives are complicated. Once you're involved in, and who owns what and who is responsible for what? Is it council? Is it government? Is it, this whole decision about how bad is your damage?
Yeah.
What is, I know what the health and safety executive would say in our modern times about whether something is up to standard, but that didn't exist in 1940, 41. Yeah. And people are obviously being expected to stay in houses which are simply not fit for habitation.
Well, and you doubtless got distrust by, class-based distrust about how any of these assessments are going to be made. Because that's one of the sort of watermarks of the age, isn't it? Is that certainly the ruling classes don't trust the classes they rule very much, so they'll think a lot of people are on the fiddle. You can claim for furniture and belongings, and injury allowances are allowed, but only for physical injuries, not mental injuries. So if if you lose it, or if you have PTSD, what we would call PTSD, if you're bomb happy, you're not going to get anything. And a married man gets 25 shillings 6pence a week while in hospital and 33 shillings once out. Women get 9 shillings and 6pence and 18 shillings once out. It's not.
Oh, it's not a Harry Enfield sketch, is it? Women, know your place.
Completely.
And also, what do you do about loss of furniture and loss of beds and your personal belongings? Again, you can claim for this, but only after the war and only at market or repair value at the date of the damage.
Oh, jeepers.
Advance payments can be made to anyone with an income of less than £400 per annum, which is quite a lot, actually. That's not a lot, but that's the equivalent if you're 25 grand a year.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because people don't leave London, do they? Want to stick around? They've got neighbours, relatives. They don't want to leave, and that there's a hallmark, isn't there, of the evacuation, which we'll talk about in a second, where people would come back, wouldn't they? They'd rather than be evacuated. It's. You're absolutely right. It's all overwhelming and awful, and but also with so many of this, what is the government supposed to do? What can it actually do in this set of circumstances? Can it, maybe
it's furiously trying to build tanks and artillery pieces, which they've left behind in Dunkirk, and create an army that's going to win a war because the French are out,
and not have its population spiral off into sort of chaos or revolution, which is the thing these people.
This is also one of the advantages of having very large armed forces, because you're then housing them.
Yeah.
In tents and camps and sending them to Egypt.
Yeah.
So that's other people that you don't have to worry about anymore. But it's the women, the children, and old and elderly who are left, and who frankly are going to be the least trouble.
Yeah. Yes. They do. You do have the army brought in, don't you, to help. In July 41, 5,000 troops of the army were released to provide mobile gangs to help repair railways, buildings, and so on. But as you said, materials prioritised for the war effort. There might be 5 million private homes damaged during the Blitz, but we'll patch them up for now. Don't worry about it. The scale of this is
just
boggling. And also what we're hearing, a lot of the tone of this is British governments like to do things on the cheap. British governments like to not face problems until they're actually presented with them in sort of in a drastic, chaotic form. There's some eternal stuff here, isn't there? In the way,
it's absolutely amazing. And there's also the sheltered derelicts, which are a big problem, which are also a morale sapper as well. So these are bombed out who are old, chronically sick, sitting kind of dribbling in a corner, looking miserable and wretched, and just depresses everybody. So they decide to treat them as air raid casualties and evacuate them to hospital beds. This frees up spaces in the rest centres and is better for morale. But on the other hand, not all of them are wanted or actually need a hospital bed. And looming over this is the old kind of sort of Victorian spectre of the workhouse, which is what happened to a lot of old people when they got old and they couldn't, they didn't have pensions and things.
Yeah.
No. So then they set up rural hostels. By June 1941, 1,500 aged but otherwise fit and homeless Londoners are settled in rural retreats. That's quite interesting, I think.
Be interesting to find out where those were.
Public morale doesn't crack. There isn't any mass panic.
It's a thing that people like to sort of say, well, that's us, that's the British, that we endured this. Would any population face a thing like this in this way?
The Italians all crumble, don't they? They go mad once, but that's because it's the summer of 1943. They're done with the war, so it's a completely different kettle of fish. But they all do get hysterical and kind of
because this kind of threat, and again, this is the first time it's happened to anyone. So in a way, does this set the blueprint? The Germans are watching this, aren't they? As we said at the end of the last episode, Hitler goes, this isn't working. This isn't cracking the public's population. And of course, the British, the War Office are looking at this and going, what lessons are there for us if we're going to bomb Germany? But it is quite extraordinary. I have to say, I'm so glad I didn't experience any of this. I have no desire to express any Blitz spirit nostalgia ever in my life. Well, there ends life under the Blitz. There's 5 more months of bombing to come all over the United Kingdom in our fourth part. And if you're keen to hear all of this in one go, if you really want to down yourself out, bum yourself out, go to our Apple podcast channel. We have ways to make you talk, where you can subscribe to that and listen ad-free and in any order you like. And then if you're even keener, go to our Patreon, subscribe as a patron, and you'll have access to stuff in advance of others. And also the dates for We Have Ways Festival 5, Viva Victory. Thank you very much for listening. Part 4 coming right up. Cheerio.
Cheerio.